Hey, comic fans, Scott Harris King here, creator of the Crimebusters. And I'm really excited today because I'm joined by Rob Multari. Rob has one of the most popular ongoing series on Kickstarter in Nightwolf. So I'm really excited to dig in and talk to him about that and about his current Kickstarter. So, Rob, thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, I've been on Kickstarter for 4.5 years, I guess, since my Crime Busters #1 first appeared. And I remember when this was coming out, it was very early on in Nightwolf, and your series is one of the first comics that I saw on there. I'm a big fan of fantasy and fantasy comics.
Hmm.
So I was really excited to see that. So I guess I wanted to ask first, like,
Yeah,
what your journey was to become a comic creator, like how that's happened for you and how Nightwolf came about.
right on. Yeah, so that kind of goes way back to like when I first started learning how to read, like preschool and first grade age. So I'm dyslexic and have attention deficit disorder, and I was struggling. And my mom came up with this idea to get these. So she knew how much I love like watching the Batman and all the different Marvel cartoons like on VHS and all that stuff back in the day. So she thought, okay, well, there's this comic books. She found a set of Batman Untold Tales that came with um, cassette tapes that had actors voicing the word bubbles. So I had gotten those and listening to, the actors and looking at the bubbles, it kind of helped me put things into context, as well as kind of like just, helping, it's easier to get like small chunks, than it is like bigger blocks of text to try and figure that out, especially at that age. And so from there also it was like, okay, well, that seemed to have helped. Now my mom's like, okay, well, I will buy you 3 comic books a week if your grades improve and you behave yourself. So let me just tell you, there wasn't very often that I didn't get those comics, every week. So that basically earned, it spurned my love for comics. And then I had, growing up I have a large collection. Fast forward to about like junior high, like I'm 13, 14, like seventh grade ish. I happened to be like in a class. It was a reading class, ironically, and we were reading Where the Red Fern Grows, and I learned that the the writer, it was basically an autobiography kind of a book, and it was about like his experiences. And it kind of like, for some reason, I guess I didn't put two and two together that like somebody could actually write a book, you know what I mean, like, and come up with these stories like they didn't just pre-exist, you know what I mean. And then finally I was like, oh well, I love comic books, and somebody must be writing these too, right? And then that's kind of like when I learned more. I really did a deep dive into learning about Stan Lee and Chris Claremont and a lot of the writers of the time, because I was really heavy into X-Men at the time. Wolverine is my favorite character, and in Marvel, and then Batman, of course, and DC. But I'm learning more about like these stories and writers and illustrators, and how these books are put together. And it kind of is like, okay, well, I want to do that, right? So here's this 13, 14-year old writing X-Men fan fiction. And it was at the time where it was several years after Wolverine had lost his adamantium, and he still hadn't got it back, right? So part of that was like, I really want to see him have his adamantium back because he was just more badass with it, right? So that was like one of the storylines. But I also made my own X-Men spin-off team with my own characters. Like I made up my own characters. I made up a whole new team, and did a bunch of, like, I did a whole crossover series. And I had sent these scripts into Marvel, just to Stan Lee, or at least thinking he would have gone to Stan Lee, and I got this really kind rejection letter from somebody who took pity on me or something. But they said, oh, your stuff's great. We unfortunately we can't use it because our storylines are so far in advance. But we encourage you to keep up the good work, and maybe someday you'll be working here. And for me at that age, that basically lit a fire under my butt to, like, to work harder and keep it up. So thinking that wasn't going to be an avenue, at that point to jump into like the Marvel universe or even DC or whatever. So I decided to take these characters that were my own, rework them into, I ended up breaking them into their own series, and then kind of like, coming up with character designs more, away from something that, like, away from like X-Men, obviously, but more like my own style and stuff. And then just in high school, I wrote the first draft of the first part of Nightwolf. I think I was in between my sophomore and junior year when I started doing the script, and the character designs. I'm not that great of an artist. I'm decent enough to get by and to kind of like translate what I want to be seen. I have enough creativity to like to come up with like like the flat, weird looking, shapely costumes and stuff. But like, it was enough for me to be able to hand that off to an artist and they can make it look better. But so when I was doing Nightwolf, I had this aesthetic that I wanted to see, because I never see, like, I've always been a werewolf fan too. So that's another thing. I didn't ever see a werewolf the way that I wanted to see a werewolf, as far as like, looks, as well as, being more of like in the hero or anti-hero situation, because they're usually like a mindless beast or somebody, somebody's pawn or something, like, with a vampire or whatever, so that's kind of like where that stemmed from, and why I wanted to go down that path with him. And so I got to a point where, like, I went through college and did all that and kind of, started and stopped until I got to the point where I had 12 issues written, um, finalized and ready to go. My editor, did the editing and all that. And so this takes us to 2013. And I'm like, all right, well, now I have this, first story arc. What am I going to do? I need to find an artist to work with, because I don't have the time to do it on my own. I'm not as good. I want to find somebody. I want to see it as like something I would buy in the store, so that began a long search through DeviantArt and other art platforms. And I eventually, I connected with Carlos Herrera, who is the illustrator for the book. And, there she wrote from there.
Well, that's awesome. Like I see a lot of parallels, with our journeys. I had started writing before I actually found comics. I've been writing since I was like 6 or 7 stories and stuff. But I remember, loved comics. I started reading when I was 10. And for me, like a big light bulb was in 1986. I read the 1986 Overstreet Price Guide. I was 13 years old. And there was a thing in there from Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, talking about his experiences getting into comics. And I was absolutely blown away, because he started writing Legion of Superheroes when he was 13 years old, which is the same age I was. And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
this guy was writing comics for DC at the same age I am. So I should be able to do the same thing, right? So I did exactly what you did. I started writing scripts. I started sending them to Marvel. And I got a rejection letter very similar to the one that you did, but I was like, I can do this. If Jim Shooter can do it, I can do it. And I was also like, I never heard of fanfic, but I was doing the same thing. But for me, it was with ElfQuest. I have somewhere I've got like a 50-page ElfQuest story, like just fanfic, where I just like what happens after the first series of ElfQuest, because I started writing it before the second series had started coming out.
Yeah.
So I was like writing all that. So yeah, I hear a lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. So what was the experience like once you connected with Carlos and you started getting the pages? Like, how did the transition onto Kickstarter go for you?
So, it took some time to get the ball rolling, with them and getting, the character designs, because I wanted to make sure we had this thing pretty much well laid out and enough stuff to cover putting into the Kickstarter. So we had all the character designs. Like, I think we had almost 20 character designs just for the entire first story arc, just set out and ready to go. And then he started working on the cover and then the first couple pages. And every time a page came out, it just like, was like tingles in my spine. I'm like, oh my God, this is actually happening, And so we got to the point where I think he had done like 6 pages, and then he actually got picked up by one of those mythic card games, kind of like Magic the Gathering.
Mhm.
So he ended up dropping the project, not because he didn't want to do it, it's just because he didn't have the time to dedicate to it. Um, and then so then I had to go back and find somebody else to kind of pick up where he left off. And but he ended up eventually finding a like a full-time job later on. So like he came back after starting with issue 4 again. So Carlos is now again full-time working with me on this as well. But there was a period where Bakuman Studios did the rest of issue 1. They did 2 and 3. So there is a little bit of a transition in there, but so it was kind of like a bittersweet situation. And then again, it just was like, with Bakuman Studio, they kind of got a little bit busy too. So I can tell like there was a little bit from like there's a difference between 2 and 3 that I was like, all right, I don't have the time to really nitpick, but you know, yeah, because like the main artist who they had put on I think went and they ended up putting someone else there claiming it was the other guy. So I kind of put a sour taste in my mouth with them. So that's when I approached Carlos again, be like, hey man, what will it take to get you back in here? So he came back and it's been, he's been a partner ever since. So I can't, I can't be more thankful for that. But yeah, then going to, so even with like having Carlos's stuff, so the first 6 pages were Carlos's, and then we shifted to Bakuman Studio for the rest of the issue. Also, the colorist at the time that took over because it ended up splitting. Carlos was doing both. Then Bakuman did the illustration, and then Ross A. Campbell did the colors for the rest of for issue 1. And so we got the book pretty much close to being done. Kickstarter, I originally set it up for a the first 3 issues in 2016, but I set it at a $20,000 goal. Now, that was, going into it with that big of a number without an audience, it was very naive on my part. If I would have just set a $5,000 goal for the first issue, we would have funded. But that was kind of like a learning lesson for me. And I then kind of had to, okay, well, now what do I do? I don't want to do that again. So I decided to do freelance web design work to make up for paying the money to finish the art, get issue 1 printed. So that was all done, ready to go. And now I'm like, okay, well, where do I sell this now? Kickstarter was supposed to be that place, and I don't have an online store yet. What do I do? So I decided to attend my first Comic-Con, which was an hour and a half from here. It's one of my usual that I went to enjoy, the Still City Con near Pittsburgh. And so I took 100 copies with me and a bunch of different prints of the character designs and the covers and stuff. And I sold almost all 100 copies that I took with me. I sold 96. And so to me, that was like, hey, I have something. People want,
Yeah,
being in a small con.
For people who don't make comics, I would say you definitely have something, because I go to conventions, smaller conventions, but I set up at some of the little conventions, and I don't think in the 3 years I've been doing cons I've sold 96 copies of everything combined. So like I've heard some of this because I've heard you on the Tyler James the Comics Launch podcast talk about this experience, and I remember thinking like, I want to know like how you did that, like what your setup was at the show, like what exactly was going on there, because this is pretty awesome to do that well at the first show.
Yeah, so the way I had my table, so I'm a web and graphic designer by trade. So some of my job duties throughout my career have been to make trade tables and stuff for like trade shows and stuff like that. So I took like that experience. I've got a big banner printed up. I got a table laid out, a tablecloth and everything. I made it look as professional as possible. And then I had a stack of books, and I had I had the prints. Basically, I had the entire table covered with prints, with like the posters, anything that I could possibly fill that table with. And and that's and basically the character designs and the cover art brought people in, and my banner brought people in to say, hey, what's this? And I it took me probably a good solid day, like the first Friday. Um, it probably took me to kind of get my spiel down. And by the time, by Saturday, I was like, okay, I could roll it off the top of my tongue. I was ready. So, I mean, that's just, being passionate about it while I was there, looking professional, having my table laid out with stuff to draw people in. I think that was what really, really helped, with that.
So we probably should have gotten into this earlier, but for those who aren't familiar with Nightwolf, we've talked a little bit about, what it's about with the werewolves. But what can you tell us about the story? I know you've done 6 issues so far, the main series, but you also have a spin-off series. So what can you tell us about the story and the characters of Nightwolf?
Right on, yeah. So, Nightwolf is a story about a young man named Rodney Marcelli who's thrown into a supernatural war against demons, witches, vampires, other werewolves. He finds out that he's born a werewolf. He starts off, this regular kid who, 17, and his birthday comes up. He turns 18, and a transformation triggers, and he becomes a werewolf. Which he was actually born a werewolf. He just didn't know. He just became, his time of maturity happened, and it happened during a time where like the Dark Covenant, which basically is led by a master vampire and has witch coven and all this stuff involved in it, kind of became aware of his presence and basically started invading his town. And he originally he had everything. He was like that epitome of like the popular football player with a football scholarship. Has friends, a girlfriend, all that. And basically everything gets taken away from him. He has to learn to handle himself, as a werewolf, and that's where Snowpaw comes into play. She comes in and she helps him learn to master his lycanthropy and his, learn how to fight hand to hand, or claw to claw, if you will. um, and then, so Snowpaw also is the spinoff series that you mentioned. So Nightwolf takes place in the modern time, and it's more of like kind of an urban fantasy horror drama, whereas like Snowpaw's origin story in the 19th century Scotland, 200 years in the past, is about, it's more of a fantasy about her coming of age and what happens and her eyes being open to the first time to fantasy creatures.
Cool. Now you currently have a Kickstarter running as well, and that's for a plushie that you did that's related to Nightwolf. So what can you tell us about that product and your current Kickstarter? I know it ends very shortly.
Yeah, so I have the prototype here with me right now, but yeah, so this thing is it's 12 inches. It's a Nightwolf voodoo doll plushie. It's inspired by a pinup by Megan Offert. It's basically it was for my trade paperback that had came out. It collects the first 4 issues of Nightwolf and has additional story and pinups. One of the pinups was about the twin witches who are featured in the series, and it shows that one of them holding the voodoo doll Nightwolf. And I thought that was such a cool touch that she had put in there on her own. And a lot of people also, liked the design and thought, hey, that would make a very cool like plushie, right? So I went back to Megan and I said, hey, can you do like a profile, layout, for to get this thing like produced? And she gave me the layout and everything. And then I contacted Skeleton Crew Studios, and they came up, they took her designs and designed this cute little plush with all the embroidery and detail in this thing. And it's like quality, but there's a minimum order of 300 to be able to produce them. So that's why I ended up coming to Kickstarter for this instead of doing it like a stretch goal, because there was no way to make that stretch goal work plus be able to fund the books.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you mentioned going to your trade. So like I'm in a position where right now my current Kickstarter, the Crimebusters, is for issue 5. And I've, there's self-contained, every issue is like a self-contained story, beginning, middle, and end. But I've also had like a subplot going. So when at the end of issue 5, it's going to be that first arc, and I'm going to be going to trade, which is going to be my first trade. I've never done it before. I'll be having that later this year. So I'm just curious, like, what was that like? Collecting those in a trade, was it like, I know sometimes like on Kickstarter in particular it's maybe a different audience because of the way they have it divided between graphic novels and comics. So I was just curious, like, how the experience was making the trade and bringing it to Kickstarter, and like how all of that went for you. Because
Right on.
something like I'm about to go through that, so I'm really curious what that process was for you.
Yeah, so I wanted to do something unique with it. I didn't want it to just be like a rehash, like just the collection, because I could do that and then cater to just the graphic novel audience. But I did want it, especially going to Kickstarter and going to my current audience. I wanted to. There's two things that I did. I did a soft cover, but I also did a really unique hardcover with a die cut, which I actually have right here. I always keep it on my desk because I love looking at this thing.
Really cool.
Yeah. So and it also like has like a vellum overlay with the werewolf as well over top of like the human form.
Oh, that's neat.
But
Yeah.
that was like one thing that made this more of a collector's piece, as well as 16 additional story pages. The pinup art and all the cover art is inside the book. So that's 152 pages, more pages than you would get if you would have had the single issues. So basically, you're getting more of a story by having that. So the people who wanted to read the whole story then came back to get that, or even just got the digital copy, which had it as well. So I mean, they had a couple different options, and another cool, unique thing that I did was I had reached out to a couple. I've seen, you get the artist involved to do variant covers, they share it out to their audience or whatever. But I never saw like, that wasn't an anthology like in a series that is bringing in other creators or other writers, right? So I approached a few fellow creators, one being Tyler James, Kevin Joseph, Travis Gibb, and Madeline Holly Rosing. All I approached them all and I said, hey, I have like this rough idea. It was kind of a director's cut if I would have like had it in this the regular issues. It kind of just got cut out of there and not really fleshed out. Take this idea, do a 4-page short on it, and that's what you have all freedom. Like basically I said, these are the characters, this was the rough idea, this is how it fits into the story, now go. And they came out, they all came back with like amazing stories that kind of like become intertwined within the 4 issues, adding to the story. Like I said, for me it was like a director's cut of stuff that I wanted in there but couldn't put in there. So it does really open up things a little bit more. It's one of those things that like it wasn't necessary for a reader to enjoy the series, but it's nice to give a little bit more background. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, they were fun little tales, that they kind of injected in that. So making it something like that, something different, that's so that it's not just like you're coming back with the same stuff. You're giving something a little extra. It helps tremendously.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I know for me, like with Crimebusters, I did the first 3 issues in black and white, and I drew them myself because I just didn't have any money. But like since I was colorblind, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do in black and white because I don't want all the people to be, green. So when I do the trade, I'm having them all colored, so that it'll be a different experience from like
Oh yeah.
my current readers. They'll be able to see it in color and have like a whole different thing. But
Oh
I
yeah,
love
and
the
I think
idea
you'll
of,
also open that up to the people who like. For me, like I prefer color books over because for whatever reason, like the black and white comics mess with my dyslexia because it's all the same color. Like I don't know what it is, if it's me or if other people feel the same.
yeah, I'm sure there's other people. And like I said, I'm colorblind, so for me, I was just like, I don't think I can do it in color because like I've tried coloring things before, and I have colored people green, like literally, because I thought I thought that was the Caucasian
That was
flesh
flesh tone,
tone, and it was green. It was green.
yeah.
But I know it's like I did the 4th issue was the first one I did in color, and I definitely had like a bump of like new people coming in that didn't want to read it in black and white. So I'm trying to do that, but I love the idea of like adding some new material and doing something cool. And the hardcover looks really cool. Just on a technical level, this maybe is just for me, but did you have to go to a different printer to have the covers done, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I did actually for the trade. I actually did go to a different printer than I usually use. I use a domestic printer, Comic Impressions, for my single issues. But because of the die cut, and especially because of the different like jags like that, I got a quote from Print Lore, who actually who's worked with Tyler before. He had recommended them, and they work with a company overseas that has a laser cutting technology, which was a kind of an experiment at the time, which it worked out perfectly. But yeah, so it came out really nice, and but it was late. Like, when do you remember when all like the boats and everything were like stuck in the harbors, like over
Yeah.
like, so there was a time like it took like an additional couple months to get it in. So I mean, the book was late getting in just because it had been sitting, at the docks for forever. So I mean, I plan on doing like a with the 12 issues, breaking it up into 3 volumes and doing something similar for each volume with a different werewolf underneath the claws. So I will plan on I hopefully we don't have any more issues with bringing stuff across the seas anymore, but I do plan on going back and using them again.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm curious, now you mentioned that you had originally planned out or written out 12 scripts. You've got the first 6 issues out, and you were just talking about doing the other trades. Do you have more storylines planned past that? Are you going to continue past issue 12? Like, what can we expect in the future from Nightwolf?
Yeah, so I do have more. Basically, without giving too much away, there is a setup for the next, let's say, couple. Like, basically, I have several. The way I have it in my head is that it's going to be either, it could be a couple seasons of a TV series, or it could be like, several movies. You know what I mean? If ever, like, it goes down that way. So yeah, I do have a long running plan for this. And issue 12 does set up 13, and it just keeps on going from there. But yeah, I do have more long running plans, and just it's a matter of just time and getting it to it. And I have other like titles that I want to try and get out there. So it may be like, depending on where I'm at time wise, and like right now I have a full-time job and family. If this doesn't become the full-time job someday, I want to be able to try and do more, and branch out with more titles and stuff. So we'll see if I put stuff in between it or not.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, was about other things. So like for me, again, I've got the 5th issue Crimebusters coming out, and like similar with Snowpaw, I had the Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam was a spin-off. I've done 2 issues of this, but I really wanted to do other completely different things in other genres. So I've got like an epic fantasy D&D inspired,
Oh,
like
nice.
70s sort of Conan-esque sword and sorcery title that
Yes.
the first issue is going to be coming out later this year.
Oh, awesome.
And I've been really excited like to get going with that. So I was wondering, like, is it about the other things that you might have? Are the other titles going to be completely separate from the Nightwolf universe, or are they going to be tied in, or they're just like a whole different thing?
So this is a shared universe. And they actually, the other 3 titles, not including Snowpaw, make an appearance in issue 2 of Nightwolf, just to kind of show that that's a shared universe. Like, there's an event that ripples kind of like through. Um, and so it just to kind of show that they do exist, but they're going to have their own separate stories. There's not going to be any interaction until like much later on. I do plan on having like a world ending event where they do have to come together. Um, but it's not going to be like they're going to be a team or anything. It just is happenstance that these
Right.
individuals are the only ones that can take care of business. But yeah, I do have 3 other titles that are just kind of like in like stasis until I'm ready to really kind of get into it. Just again, it's time, money, and finding the right artist to work with.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna have all the links to your Kickstarter down below. I'm gonna have the links to my Kickstarter down below as well. I'll have the links to all your stuff for anybody who's interested in picking up Nightwolf. And I want to thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.